Yeah, you either go Ramsey, you go Lambert, I think, to start off against UNC. I just really think, honestly, from seeing Chaney up close, and I know Mike is familiar with him there at Tennessee as well. I mean, he's just it's all about the scheme and what guys he has to fit that. And for me, I really feel like if you put Eason out there at the very first of the game and he doesn't have that support from a Chubb or Sony Michel, guys that obviously have a lot of game experience. When you talk about Michel finishing out the last several games for Georgia last year being the starter, I just think that really sets him up for failure, maybe possibly at the first, because you're going to have to rely on a freshman quarterback and possibly some very inexperienced running backs. That being said, if you looked at the offensive line last year and how they performed, that is definitely not a situation I'd want to put my future quarterback, the guy who is potentially going to be the future of my program, out there on the field. A lot of times last year you just saw the line, it would just break down, and that was a lot of the issues that they had with what quarterbacks they did have in place with Lambert and Ramsey. So those guys weren't able to really do their job, and hence the reason why Chubb was utilized so much. But that being said, I feel like with Pittman, going out and picking him up as the offensive line coach, you will see some vast improvements there on their offensive line just year one, within year one actually, this upcoming season, I feel like. So you'll notice that. But with Chaney, Chaney likes to go deep a lot of times. Chaney likes to air the ball out. He will run the ball too. He's effective in that aspect. There was a big clash of opinions when he was at Arkansas with Bielema and him, so you never really got to see a full frontal attack, I guess, as it were, with Chaney. But Kirby Smart really liked the guy, and I think that has a lot more to do with how you approach this North Carolina game coming up in September and who you put back there as your starter. When Sonny comes back, and when Chubb comes back, I think that kind of dictates how you go about putting Eason in. You've got a cupcake coming up after North Carolina, so I think you could easily slide him in there to kind of get the first taste of the game, and that's a big deal. But I think more so, this injury with him and the fact that you already were fighting the fact that you had an injury and you didn't know the timeline on Chubb, now I think this really pays, it really dictates on who gets that starting spot at the quarterback position, not so much just on talent, but on the fact that you kind of really want to protect your future here with Eason. I feel like Eason was a big land for Georgia, and to put him out there against what we expect to be a salty defense led by Chizik in North Carolina, that could be kind of haphazard, I think.
Yeah, I was all about for Kirby Smart in his first year to get the ball rolling with Jacob Eason and taking a lumps year one. But now with the Michel injury, and we still don't know with Nick Chubb, yes, that throws a wrench into the plan, I think. Georgia, they lose 3 offensive starters on like Chad said, an underwhelming offensive line. They lose both offensive tackles in John Theus and Colton Houston and their center. So, that's your 3 main cogs there on your offensive line for a quarterback. And, now they're replacing 3 of those guys, and you still don't really know who your quarterback is. Plus, you might be without your top 2 running backs. So that is a lot of, inexperience that Georgia will have around Eason if they decide to throw Eason in there. Malcolm Mitchell, he's gone, but he was the best receiver last year as well. Of course, they got Terry Godwin coming back, and I think the most important part with Chaney coming in, he likes to use the tight ends, and I think that was underutilized at Georgia a good bit last year. And I think for whoever is quarterback, that will probably be the most reliable target for whoever that quarterback is, and namely Blazevich for the tight end for Georgia. So there's a lot of factors here now. I think that like Chad said, Chaney's system would help Eason, but kind of being there early, I question: do you really want to maybe ruin his psyche? He's a freshman. We don't know how he will respond to adversity. In high school, he really wasn't asked to read defenses a whole lot. He has to get that part of the game down. He has to learn the college game. The only way to learn really is to be on the field, but he needs help. So with the injury to Michel, I really think it probably puts a wrench into Kirby Smart's year one plans.
Hey, Mike, it was that 2013 team that lost Todd Gurley after he and Marshall tore it up in 2012 and almost went to the national championship game, both gaining 1,000 yards. And then Gurley goes down, Marshall goes down. It was that, you probably remember it well, it was the Tennessee game. It was the the Pig Howard game where he stretched to the pylon and didn't get the job done, and you lose a close one in overtime. But Georgia went 8-5 that season. So the running game still, they got the yardage. J.J. Green switched from defensive back, played some running back, and he had some nice games, some 125-yard games. So on the surface, it looked like they patched the holes, but a top 10 team preseason that was better than this Georgia team turns into an 8-5 team because they just got ravaged by injuries. And then by game 10 or 12, they're playing a Brendan Douglas, a tailback who was a nice back, serviceable, but shouldn't be starting for Georgia in the SEC. So here we've got an issue that could affect the quarterback slot as well, where it was Aaron Murray then. Now it's possibly a much less experienced quarterback or a not as good a quarterback, even though he's got some experience.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for bringing up that memory of Pig Howard's.
It just came to mind, Mike. I'm sorry.
But I mean, your point with Georgia is absolutely correct. I tell you, Sony Michel's rehab and expected return week 1 and week 2, I think it's a pretty. What I'm worried about is I haven't heard a lot of optimism on Chubb's recovery, and that's an injury that can either go, the rehab can either go really well or it can linger on. So I think there's growing pessimism, or maybe not pessimism. I think there's growing concern about Chubb's rehab down there in Athens. So I think they're going to start off the season much the same way they ended last season, with a lot of question marks. They do have, you talked about serviceable running backs. I think they only have one on the depth chart with meaningful carries. They do have a highly touted true freshman coming in, Elijah Holyfield, who of course is the son of the boxer Evander Holyfield. So, do you want to start a true freshman at running back, which is certainly easier than starting a true freshman quarterback, or do you want to risk starting a true freshman at both quarterback and running back? I think Chad's point about the offensive line in Georgia, I think that's going to weigh heavily on Chaney. Like David said, Chaney's kind of a system guy. He's more worried about the quarterback's ability to execute the system and manage the game. Not to use that term negatively, than necessarily the quarterback's experience or his ability to execute certain plays. So I will tell you, I think coaches, going back to Chad's point, I think coaches are a little bit less reluctant to play true freshman quarterbacks now. If you look at the last 5 or 6 years, you got Brett Rippon, Tanner Mangum had a knockout season last year, I believe, as a true freshman. Gardner at Louisville, Kenny Hill, and of course Josh Rosen last year at UCLA. So I don't think coaches are necessarily as reluctant to start true freshmen just because they're freshmen. It's worth remembering that Eason came in and did spring practice with Georgia, so he's been in the system for almost a half a year now. And if he's a smart kid, that can go a long way. Those 14 extra practices of spring ball and being in the program for about 5 or 6 months now, or 7 months once we start the season, that's going to go a long way for Jacob Eason. But Chaney's going to have a huge decision to make there with the offensive line and the lack of running back. Not only a freshman quarterback, but does he start a freshman tailback as well?
So they're all good points, and who's right? Do you stay conservative and go with the competition between Ramsey and between Hudson Mason? Or Greyson Lambert? I'm going back a couple of years. Greyson Lambert from Virginia. You go with those two guys, play it safe, play it conservative, think you've typically got the better talent at least early in the season against some of those opponents, even North Carolina, or do you open it up, let the high ceiling guy come in? Obviously, we're not in the August reps to see how well Eason's coming along, how well he grasps the offense, but point well taken, Mike. If this was 25 years ago, they go conservative. Most coaches in America today, with the training and with the reps and the tutelage that these kids have coming out of high school, if they're at this level and this ability, I'm not going to say that they're ready to go, but we see it time and time again, freshman quarterbacks doing extremely well across the nation on a number of big stages. That's not necessarily the way they should go, but it's being done all over the place, and I think to David's point in particular, the state of the offensive line should play into that decision heavily